My name is Rob Good, and welcome to this episode of Shit I Have to Teach in 20 Minutes, a podcast for history teachers or for anyone else who wants a quick dose of history. Thank you for joining us today. In every episode, my colleague Eric Hahn and I interview a historian about their scholarship. We ask them to identify the most important concepts they think teachers should share with their students about the topic for the day. We also include free lesson plans that can be downloaded from the episode notes linked to this podcast. Everything is free for the teachers, for everybody out there. Eric, what is our focus today?
All right, our focus for today, if you're a frequent listener, you know that we explored the Ottoman Empire in an earlier episode. And so we're going to explore more ideas to think about when teaching and learning about the Ottomans, maybe after the rule of Sultan Selim. The time period for the Ottomans is, again, it's arguable, but now these closing dates, maybe not so arguable. There's a little bit more documentation, I think. Anyway, world history books, once again, can be somewhat confusing to teachers who are unfamiliar with the Ottomans and are just having students read the textbook. But we're going to take a look at the Ottomans, hopefully up until the end of World War I, which is kind of an abrupt end to the Ottomans.
I'm so glad we're doing a second episode on this topic because, as we learned in the last episode, this empire, the Ottomans, span from the 13th century to the beginning of the 20th century. It's the longevity and their importance is so significant. So who is our guest for today?
Our guest is a friend of this podcast. And this is Dr. Alan Mikhail, wrote a book. I'm going to talk about it again. It's called God's Shadow, Sultan Selim, where we ended actually the last podcast. Sultan Selim, sorry to interrupt the title, His Ottoman Empire and the Making of the Modern World. And it was influential on my teaching. It talks again about influences of the modern world, religious diversity, which we talked about the last podcast, military conquest and global connections, and Dr. Mikhail's writing style. Once again, you do not have to have any prior knowledge. He will lead you through what's going on during Sultan Selim's rule. I very, very strongly recommend this book. It's just a great story. And again, if you're really want to do a deep dive, the references are amazing too. Professor Mikhail teaches in the Department of History at Yale University, where he is currently, the department chair. Fields of interest include the Middle East, the early modern Muslim world, the Ottoman Empire. I could stop there, but he's also doing work with Egypt, early modern history, environmental history, and the history of medicine. And he wrote this book called Newcomers. If you teach New York history or colonial America, please, please, please read this book. It's a great read. It's not quite as long as God's Shadow, but it's a very important book, I think. But it also teaches about this kind of unassuming couple who become assuming, I guess, Anthony and his wife Gretchen, and their story about not only where they moved from the Netherlands, but how their lives progress in New Amsterdam, New York. So anyway, I'm very excited about this episode. Dr. Mikhail will be talking about the Ottomans sort of post-Selim in this episode.
Well, welcome back, Professor Mikhail. We are so thrilled to have you back. And I'm going to ask what we always ask to start off the podcast, which is, what would you say are the most important ideas, particularly about the Ottoman Empire after Selim, that teachers should teach and students should know regarding that time period?
Well, thank you, Eric and Rob, for having me back. To answer your question, I would say it's the remarkable longevity of the empire after this period. So usually, the kind of classical way of teaching the Ottoman Empire is rise, to the period of Selim and Sulieman, as we talked about a little bit last week. And then after that, a period of what's usually called decline. from, say, 1600 to World War I. Now, that's 300 years. The United States has been around for 250 years. So that's a very long decline, if indeed it was a decline. And we might actually think that it wasn't a decline, but was, the life of a state, adapting, changing its practices, fending off challenges. Yes, losing war sometimes and territory, fine, but able to make it into the 20th century, which is a difficult thing to say for many states. An empire that lasted for 600 years, and in the period we're talking about, 300 years. So we might ask why that is. And I think this also leads us into maybe one of the reasons why it ended. So if I was to maybe point to one reason for the longevity of the Ottoman Empire, it was its ability to rule lightly over its subjects, right? This is not the French in Algeria, right? The Ottomans are not interested in everyone speaking Ottoman Turkish, in everyone going to the same schools that they have in the capital city. The Ottomans basically allowed local populations to maintain their local practices, to have kind of local forms of rule, even as long as they paid taxes to the Ottoman state on a regular basis, didn't rebel, and provide some soldiers to the military every now and then. So this meant that you have parts of the Ottoman Empire, say in Bosnia or in Syria, where if you read the sources from that period, the sources from Syria are in Arabic. The court record, the documents of the Ottoman state in Syria are written in Arabic in the local language, same in Bosnia in the local language. And it's really about local politics. So the Ottomans were very good at giving autonomy to populations. And I think that's they ruled not with a strong hand, which meant that people were sort of fine with them maintaining order in the countryside. Now, this will change in the 19th century. The main reason it will change is nationalism. There's a story about European influence in the Ottoman Empire here, of course, but there's also a story of kind of, the rise of local nationalism, so that people in Syria or in Bosnia will say, we are technically part of the Ottoman Empire, but we've been basically ruling ourselves for 200 years. The Ottomans would come in every now and then and ask for taxes. We should just rule ourselves. We can do that. We're the Syrian nation. We're the Bosnian nation. We're the Egyptian nation. And so it's that challenge of nationalism in the 19th century and the inability of the Ottomans to keep all of that energy under their umbrella that will be one of the main factors for the kind of breakup of the empire, beginning at the end of the 19th century, but then, really with World War I is the final end.
If I could backtrack for a little bit, so there was this, idea that you put it as kind of rule lightly, and then people could sort of self-rule, but they had to pay the tribute or the tax. And could you get into that tax structure at all? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, Ottoman historians love to talk about taxation. So thank you for the question.
Sure.
Boring to some, but wholly interesting for many. It was different in different places, of course, and changed over time. So I'll describe maybe two systems. One is the most common system of land tenure and taxation. It's called the Timar system, Timar. And basically, the empire would designate plots of land, and would use those lands as payment for military service, right? So if someone was a soldier in the army during a campaign, in return, instead of a salary, they would be given a plot of land that they could raise crops from, even sometimes raise their own taxes from the people who lived on that land. And this was a form of payment. Another system was a kind of land auction system, whereby, and many empires did both of these things, but whereby, again, a plot of land would be designated, and the Ottoman state would say, we want X amount of income from this land every year. Okay. And so there would be an auction for people to pay for the right to gain taxes from that plot of land to give over to the Ottoman state. Okay, so one of the Ottoman currencies was the akçe. Okay, so if we say, I'm in New Haven today, so New Haven owes the Ottoman state 1,000 akçes every year. The three of us would bid for the right to raise those 1,000 akçes. Okay, suppose, Eric, you win. All right, so now you are the holder of this plot of land, and it's your responsibility to give 1,000 akçes every year to the state. Now, how do you get that money? That's up to you. It's usually you raising taxes from the peasants underneath you. Sometimes it's extortion, but it's usually raising taxes, right? If you raise more than 1,000 akçes in a given year, because there's been a lot of crops and people have been very productive, you keep that excess, whatever it is. If you raise less, you have to make up that loss to give your 1,000 akçes over to the state. So it's a way of both of these systems are ways of devolving the kind of day-to-day management of land and of taxation to these locals again. This goes back to the kind of local autonomy issue that we were talking about before. So these people become very important individuals in these locations throughout the empire. And some of them become almost like independent rulers if they, over years are raising taxes and come to control a lot of land and people.
You just made taxation interesting.
Well, and it raises an interesting question for me too. You had mentioned that one of the challenges that the empire faces is the rise of nationalism in the 19th century. Is that a product of perhaps local resistance? Does nationalism grow locally? Because I'm sure that there was a little bit of corruption if people are squeezing an akçe or two out of peasants that don't have that. Or were those ideas that were imported? I know that the Austro-Hungarian Empire is doing this. You've got Italian nationalism emerging, German nationalism. Are these forces of modernism that are just in the 19th century, or are they specific to the situations within the empire?
Yeah, I mean, as with anything, it's a little bit of all of them in the sense that, yes, you have in the 18th century the rise of these very large families in different parts of the empire who begin as these kinds of tax collectors. But because they're kind of strong men in their local areas, they're able to carve out some autonomy from the Ottoman state. And again, because if order is maintained and taxes are flowing, the Ottoman state is basically happy. So they're willing to let these families control it. But over time, they become more and more powerful. They might start trading with other people they're not supposed to be trading with. The French and the British will come in and say, you don't need these Ottomans. Why don't you just trade directly with us? We'll buy your textiles, for cash, and you can bypass the Ottoman state, right? So the idea of this kind of autonomous, independent rule starts building in all these different kinds of ways. And yes, the Ottomans, as we've been saying over the course of the 2 episodes, are a major world power. So they're not, they're a part of the wave of nationalist fervor and ideas that are rising at the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century. They're often reading some of the same texts and part of these conversations as well. And so all of these ideas and the specific history of kind of autonomous rule within the empire, and then the foreign element, are all kind of coalescing in the 19th century to create these challenges for the empire. And the empire tries to adapt again in the 19th century, as it had been adapting for 500 years up to that point. The Tanzimat, the age of reform in the 19th century, is a very important topic. And one of the ways to understand that is the Ottomans trying to respond to some of these challenges that had been building over the previous couple of centuries, having to do with religious difference, the place of the individual in society, taxation, autonomous rule, etc.
Any other sort of internal issues going on with the Ottomans, 19th into the 20th century?
I mean, yes. All kinds of things are happening.
Yeah, leading question.
Obviously, one is the rise of ethnic nationalisms in specific, right? So the Armenian genocide is, one of the most tragic periods in Ottoman history, and it begins at the end. What will become the Ottoman genocide, the Armenian genocide. The seeds of that are found at the end of the 19th century. A very complex history, but that is an autonomous Ottoman story, right? It involves global powers as well, but it has to be understood as an autonomous Ottoman story. And in some ways is kind of proof that the Ottoman system could not maintain, right? It could not square the circle of ethnic difference, ethno-nationalism, autonomy at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. And again, the Ottomans are not unique in that.
Yeah. What about? I don't know if you actually have an answer for this, but the choice that the Ottomans make during that first war, the Great War, had they made other choices? I mean, we could what if history all day, but I guess better question might be, why did they make the choice that they made in terms of their alliances?
Yeah, well, I mean, the main reason they allied with Germany is that the British and the French had been carving up the Ottoman Empire for a century by that point, right? The French in Algeria in 1830, the British in Egypt in the 1880s, even a little bit before, the French in Egypt, Napoleon's invasion, the French in parts of Anatolia. So that had been building for quite a long time. So it would be kind of hard to imagine the Ottomans allying with those powers in the war. So that's one of the main reasons. And there had actually been a long history of German-Turkish interaction around intellectual issues, students going back and forth, those kinds of things. And these things are not one way, in the sense that, during the Second World War, this is not directly relevant to your question, but a lot of Germans, and specifically German Jews, came to Turkey as a safe haven. So, yeah, but yes, the fact that the Ottomans ally with Germany in World War I is, ultimately the reason that the empire goes out. But again, we could say that the processes that ultimately ended the empire, as I've been saying over the past few minutes, were much more long term. Of course, World War I is the kind of, the ultimate kind of conflagration that ends it. But those things have been simmering for quite a long time.
And it is the actual end of the Ottomans isn't until the 1920s. Is that correct? If we could kind of maybe close with that. It's a technicality, but because the Ottomans are pretty much finished at end of World War I. But if you could maybe lead teachers through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question, actually, because the Turkish Republic is founded in 1923. That's when Turkey sort of begins formally, right? 1923. Between the end of World War I and 1923 is actually a very complicated period in which there are various occupations. There's the population transfer of Greeks and Turks. But to very simply put it, I would say we have the end of the Ottoman Empire by the end of World War I, and then this kind of interregnum period until 1923, when the Republic officially begins. A lot of Ottoman historians argue that we should actually not use those dividing lines, that you can see a lot of continuity from the end of the Ottoman period into the early Republic, which is not surprising, right? Historians like to argue for continuity generally, but also it's not that surprising that things don't change overnight, right? So what are some examples of that? So, the language reform that Ataturk institutes, right? So Ataturk, the founder of the Turkish Republic, is very interested in a complete break with the Ottoman past, right? That the Ottoman Empire was basically holding back Turkish nationalism in this case, right? That we had all of the subject populations, those ungrateful people, everything we did for them over the centuries, and all they wanted was independence. Fine to be rid of them, right? Islam as a backward force holding us back, right? The future is Europe. We should be looking to the West. So we're going to be a secular republic. We're going to change the language to the Latin alphabet instead of the Arabic alphabet. And we're going to become Europeans, essentially, right? That's the Ataturk project, right? Turks as Europeans. But if you find people were writing in their diaries, and you will find old books in Turkey in the marginalia in the 1950s, right? So 20 years after the founding of the Republic, are written still in Ottoman Turkish, right? So imagine if someone said overnight, instead of writing English in the way you've always been writing it, now you're going to write in this completely other alphabet.
Right. Yeah. Well, exclamation point and period. Thank you very much, Dr. Mikhail. Rob, closing remarks?
Yes, thank you very much for joining us again and bringing this story to this piece. But I love the notion of that in the 1950s, folks were still keeping those notes in the margins, the continuity and change in history. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, listeners, for joining us again. Remember, you can download free lessons associated with this episode from the link provided in the episode notes. Be sure to stay tuned after this brief song to hear a description of those lessons.
Oh no, the clock is ticking, 20 minutes, time is spinning, pulling facts from thin air, hope they think I came prepared.
We hope you found Dr. Mikhail's comments about the later Ottoman Empire helpful to you. Since I never really taught too much about the tax systems in the late Ottoman Empire, I felt compelled to focus on that. This lesson folds in some geographically diverse notions too. Very simply, in alphabetical order, I chose to find readings about Ottoman taxation in Bosnia, Egypt, and Syria. Students will be divided into groups, each having their own readings. They discuss the complexities of the Ottoman taxation in the region. Then a few students report to the rest of the class about their regions in a sort of a jigsaw manner. Students ultimately are asked to write a paragraph about the similarities and differences of Ottoman taxation in Bosnia, Egypt, and Syria. All right, Rob, how about your lesson?
Well, first, I'm worried that your lesson will be too taxing for the students.
You know,
wait, where's the rim shot? All right, okay. All right, my lesson focuses on the Tanzimat reforms that Alan discussed. I found it really interesting that the reforms that the Ottomans put in place to create greater centralization actually contributed to the fracturing of the empire. In the lesson, students analyze how different citizens of the empire from different places, different classes, and different religious backgrounds would have viewed these reforms. Then they predict if the reforms will strengthen or weaken the empire. After a brief discussion with the class, the teacher will play a short video that explains how these reforms ultimately fostered greater nationalism and weakened the empire.
Wow, tough choices, teachers. Maybe do them both. Well, thank you for listening. And remember, you can download the free lessons from the link provided in the episode notes. And please be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube. Rob will tell you how.
You can reach us for any feedback, questions, or suggestions you might have about the conversations or lessons at historyin20@gmail.com. History in20 is all spelled out. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.